She couldn't understand where she was. Nothing was visible, only some conversations about how today His Majesty looked at the Crown Prince completely differently. It was exciting to watch all this. The aristocrats were sure that no father would want to hurt his child, since the prince is the heir to the empire. His Majesty treats him harshly, but with love. Then the conversation turned to a certain Queen Eliza. The ladies wanted her to appear at the event to see the Crown Prince. If she heard correctly, this must be the world from the novel she recently read. The truck that hit her appeared to be a rebirth truck. At some point, the girl was glad that she was able to say goodbye to her past and sad life. It seems the cat she saved before she died brought her good luck. Regardless of what character she transformed into, since she no longer knew what was happening in the novel, she was sure that this life would be more successful than the last one. The girl was curious about who she had become: a gorgeous villain, a beautiful daughter from a royal family, or someone else. A wealthy family would have made her life easier, but being a self-sufficient country girl would have been great too, and that could have made the story touching. Since her past life was hard, she promised herself that she would make this life in the novel luxurious. Suddenly, she realized that she had just somehow found herself in the air. She was supposed to be the main character, or the villain, or the main character's friend in this story, but she was not reincarnated as a human. The girl transformed into a kitten the size of a palm. Her arms were covered with soft white fur. In the modern world, most people adored cats, but in the world inside the novel she read, the situation was completely different. The novel details the main character's obsession and madness towards the protagonist, which gives readers both pleasure and torment. Eugene was the greatest empire on the continent of Denver, and its ruler was Emperor Kilian Gunther, the protagonist of the novel. After the empire was founded, a prophecy was received that cursed cats would lead the empire to ruin. The frightened residents searched the entire empire and got rid of the cats. Even after several centuries, not a single cat was seen in the empire. The prophecy did not come true, and the empire flourished. The girl understood that she was finished, even considering that this was the beginning of the story. In the Eugene Empire, children were taught from an early age that cats were monstrous animals and should be disposed of on sight. This was what she read. The knights caught up with His Highness and asked what had happened, but the prince did not tell the truth. He waved them off, saying that it would be better to hunt another day, since he was not feeling well at the moment. She now had no doubt who was in front of her. Remembering the description from the novel, the girl became even more confident that she knew who he was. In the Eugene Empire, only members of the royal family had red eyes. Among them, there was only one person who was able to inherit Queen Eliza's black hair. The handsome man who grabbed her was the Crown Prince, and soon to be the ruler of the Eugene Empire, Kilian Gunther. She encountered a character who was described as the most ferocious tyrant who ever lived. Since he knows about the prophecy related to the death of the empire, he could definitely kill her because she is a cat. It seemed unfair, because she had no part in the atrocities that the cats were accused of committing. She was just a poor girl who died saving a cat. She began to explain to him that she was a human in the form of a cat, but the prince heard only loud meowing. The cat was surprised that the prince had realized so quickly who she was, since he had only seen the animal in paintings, since they had been destroyed. The animal tried with all its might to explain that time was running out, and it was worth making a deal, since she knew the future, and the empire would soon fall. To her surprise, the prince put the cat in his pocket. She assumed that instead of the garden, where everything was in plain sight, he wanted to kill her somewhere else. Kilian sat the cat in front of him and began to study it. It didn't look like the pictures. The teeth had not yet grown below the chin, and the claws did not look at all threatening. He assumed that it was still a kitten. In one thing he was right. By hiding their malice, cats can charm people. After looking at the animal for a long time, the prince still could not understand why people considered them so cute. Kilian began to give various commands to the cat so that she would follow them, and after some time, she became completely exhausted. The cat extended her finger to the animal and nuzzled it with her nose, as if kissing it. The prince froze, looking at his finger, and was overcome by a strange feeling, as if the cat understood everything he was saying. He believed that it was the only living creature that did this. Sitting at the dinner table, he wondered what to feed her. At some point, the cat thought that he was not going to kill her, since he wanted to feed her. She is very lucky to still be alive, as she is the cat that destroyed the empire. The prince appeared to be about 18 or 19 years old. Soon after he becomes an adult, Kilian takes the throne, but the novel takes place while he is already ruling. This meant that the cat was the backstory to this novel. Handing her a plate of milk, the prince told her to eat. The cat stared at him indignantly, because people like her could get stomach pains from drinking milk made for people. Well, she should try anyway. The milk was so warm and delicious that without even noticing it, she drank the whole plate. The prince said that cats were considered to be intelligent and cruel creatures, but in front of him was some pitiful cat. Moreover, it was so fragile that he could accidentally break it. He still couldn't understand how something like that could kill people. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Killian grabbed the cat abruptly and put it in his shirt pocket, a necessary measure, as someone entered the room. However, the animal was upset, because the prince did it rather rudely. An incredibly beautiful girl came in and was told that the prince liked the dish she had prepared yesterday, so she came to personally thank him for the compliment. She was terribly worried, because His Highness had lost his appetite, but the girl was glad that he was eating the food she had prepared. The lady insisted that Killian enjoy the food again today and appreciate the effort she had put into preparing it. Finally, the cat remembered the girl with a soft and gentle voice, insisting on preparing food for the prince. The only one who will do anything to satisfy her thirst for power is the evil Countess Catherine Harmon. She seduced the emperor, Killian's father, and became empress, a girl of 20 years old, who received the Harmon estate from the emperor. The main characters had a hard time dealing with her because she was smart and powerful. Today's dish, lamb seasoned with salt and pepper and served with a Bordeaux wine sauce, was the beginning of her grand plan. Her plan was to use the potion made with black magic that she had also used against the emperor, and now add it to Killian's food. Once the prince is poisoned by this potion, she will make him into a puppet that she can control while he rules. Catherine insisted that the prince eat in her presence, citing the fact that she always felt unwell when he ate alone. Looking menacingly at the girl, Killian asked if he ate all of this, would she stop chatting in that case? Catherine replied that His Majesty the Emperor had asked her to make sure the heir had eaten, so she was following his orders. The cat in the pocket really hoped that the prince would not follow her lead and eat this food. She couldn't let Killian eat what Catherine had cooked. She had no other choice, and she decided to use her secret weapon, namely, to scratch the prince. The cat didn't want to resort to this, but she had no other choice. She tried with all her might to show that the prince should not eat this food, otherwise his consciousness would be clouded. Putting his spoon down on the table, Killian told the countess that his father was not the man to take care of his food, and besides, he was not hungry. At that moment, Catherine realized that things were bad. She prepared to leave, wishing His Highness a good evening. As soon as the door closed behind the countess, Killian took out the cat and showed her his hands, or rather, the scratches on it. As a cat, she already seemed strange to him, and now that she had scratched his hand in the middle of dinner, she was sure that the prince would not spare her. The animal began to meow loudly, trying to explain that she did not want to hurt him, but only wanted to help. Finally, she realized that he didn't understand her. The cat was sure that this was definitely the end for her. At some point, the animal thought that she should have let the prince eat this food and thought about escaping. At that very second, she tried to push these thoughts away from herself. After all, her conscience would not allow her to do this, because how could she remain indifferent and watch as someone became dependent on this terrible drug? In the original story, the prince was already addicted to the potion, but at this point in time, this could have been prevented. To do this, he would have to give up Catherine's food in the future. After stroking the cat's head, Killian said that if she scratched him because he put her in his pocket, then in the future she could stay outside. In that case, he decided to continue eating dinner. The cat panicked again and began to think about how to stop the prince from eating this poisoned food. The food smelled bad. She had to stop Killian immediately. It was time for the second secret weapon. She was going to hang on his arm. Since the prince managed to throw her off, the cat stood right in front of the plate of food and began to meow loudly. Killian looked confused and worried. Human speech. She needed it urgently. With all her might, the cat tried to show him the power of universal body language. Finally, he realized that she was trying to tell him that he shouldn't eat this food. The prince felt like he was going crazy, so he asked the cat to show him more things he shouldn't eat. He still thought it was nonsense, because how could a cat know such things? But judging by her gestures, if he ate this food, he would become ill and faint, as if poisoned. It seemed like complete nonsense. Perhaps it was because it was a cat in front of him. He assumed that these animals had some kind of ability. Killian could not even imagine that it was a human in front of him. The girl wondered what if she was not a human, but in fact just a cat. In any case, she shouldn't have lost hope. The cat decided to stay close to the crown prince, who didn't seem to be eager to kill her, and in the meantime, figure out a way to become human again. The charm of the fluffy white kitten was irresistible, so she decided to use it to win the prince's favor. Killian stared at the cat for a long time, then smiled, calling her funny. There was a knock on the door again, and it turned out that His Imperial Majesty had given an order. The Emperor wanted to see his son in the library as soon as possible. The cat was left alone in the room, which looked rather gloomy, as if no one lived there. According to what I read in the novel, the prince spent most of his time at the academy and only occasionally stayed at the palace. Killian ordered the animal to stay in the room. She could look around, but only within the confines of this room. Upon returning, the prince immediately went to the shower, taking off his shirt. A huge number of scars and bruises could be seen on his body. Finally, the cat waited for his return. Approaching the animal, he said that it was good that she was still here. Killian was about to go to bed, telling the cat that she could go to bed too. But first, she had to make sure she stayed in bed too. She smelled a familiar scent. It seemed to be blood. In the original story, the emperor severely punished his son. Maybe that's the reason why he saw him today. To be honest, the girl was always interested in why the main characters of fantasy romance novels were always so courageous. She also thought that Killian's backstory was a cliché, but now that she had personally witnessed it, it was hard to comprehend. This is not just a story, but a reality happening right before her eyes. The smell of blood and the cool air were so real. Opening his eyes slightly, Killian thought he was having another nightmare. Finally opening his eyes, he realized that this was not a nightmare at all, but an absolutely real girl in front of him. And, what's more, without clothes. He jumped up suddenly and realized that she was missing, the cat that should have been in the place where this girl was now lying. For the first time, he encountered a real cat, which he had only seen in drawings. Killing her on the spot would have been the right decision, but for some reason, he couldn't bring himself to do it. Firstly, where could a cat come from when they were all supposed to be destroyed? But for some reason, this creature ended up right in the palace garden. Secondly, despite being an animal, she acted as if she understood human language. She looked so small and fragile, as if she could barely protect herself. Yet she protected the prince from the poisoned food. She waited for his return. She also kept him company until he fell asleep. Therefore, this cat, no matter how dangerous a creature it was, even if it had to be torn apart, Killian had found it, and therefore it was his. At that moment, he thought that if this woman dared to raise her hand on what belonged to him, then whoever she was, he would not forgive her. The prince shouted across the room for her to get up right now. The girl didn't even move from her place. Moreover, she didn't even wake up. Raising his hand right above her face, he shouted, ordering her to open her eyes quickly. The stranger opened her eyes slightly. At that very second, a bright beam of light appeared, and instead of the girl, there was a cat again. Killian froze in complete bewilderment. The cat was clearly unhappy that she was woken up in the middle of the night. Besides, the prince looked extremely irritated. The cat began to wonder what was bothering him so much, whether she had kicked him in his sleep or had touched his wounds. Looking into her eyes, the prince asked who she was. Even if he asks about it, being a cat, she still couldn't answer him. Coming even closer to her, Killian asked if she was really a cat. A real cat. The animal assumed that His Highness had gone mad. Otherwise, why would he ask such a thing? She thought that he was under the influence of the poison that had accumulated in his body over a long period of time, or that he was talking in his sleep due to the stress he had experienced. The girl remembered reading about the antidote in the novel. Countess Catherine was the only one who knew about him, and she took that information to her grave. So the cat had no idea how to get the antidote for the prince. Killian promised the animal that if she revealed her identity now, he would spare her from severe punishment. The cat demonstratively began to lick her paw in front of him, making it clear that she was a real cat and very cute, so he should forget about his thoughts. In a completely cold tone, the prince asked what she was doing. The animal was upset because her cat cuteness didn't work. She assumed it might be a side effect of the poison from that potion. She tried with all her might to make His Highness come to his senses. Killian gave up. Assuming there was no point in interrogating her, he carefully covered the cat with a blanket. Wrapped in warmth, she fell asleep, and at that very moment, she turned into a girl again. Cats were the creatures that destroy the Eugene Empire, so the people put all their resources into eradicating them, and that's what the Crown Prince was taught. However, If you look at the so-called cat in front of him, and despite the fact that this cat is alive, the Empire still exists. In fact, it was different from what Killian had heard. Moreover, he had never read about cats turning into people. Perhaps in some places the story was broken. Eugene was his empire, and it would be his no matter what. So Killian would stop at nothing to uncover all the secret histories of the Empire. For now, he had to do everything he could to ensure that this cat was not discovered or taken away. Right now, he needed to buy clothes for this stranger. The cat reluctantly woke up with the first rays of the sun. Once she became this animal, she needed a lot of sleep. When she woke up, she didn't find Killian next to her. After taking a step, the cat realized that something was holding her paw. At that moment, the prince appeared and said that he could not let her go. He looked quite friendly with a plate of milk in his hands. After sniffing lightly, the cat realized that this guy still smelled of blood. Killian was completely perplexed by the fact that this animal was sniffing him. The cat began to climb towards the belt of his robe. Biting it lightly with her teeth, she immediately untied the robe, but was caught, as the prince was confused by her actions. The animal was not bothered by his words, since her whole gaze fell on his body, on which there was not a single living place. In the Eugene Empire, Killian was known as the best warrior and swordsman. These marks indicated insane aggression, but it was unclear why he did not fight back. The emperor, who was revered for his strength in the original story, suffered much abuse in his youth. Even as the protagonist of a tragic novel, he endured such treatment. The cat began to meow madly. The prince did not understand what she was doing, but he assumed that she was so upset because she felt his pain. Smirking, Killian said that her behavior was very strange for an ordinary cat, and she was acting like a human. He didn't understand whether she was deceiving him or whether she really didn't know anything about herself. After stroking the cat on the head, the prince invited her to go for a walk, citing the fact that he needed to buy something. Now that she was outside the castle, she felt happier. The cat peered at the passers-by and this beautiful empire, but the pleasure was short-lived, as the prince ordered her paws to be removed from the glass. Finally, they arrived at their destination. This place was the most popular clothing store in the empire. The cat was completely confused about what she was doing here. Even if the prince wanted to buy things for himself, why did he take her with him? Killian's attention fell on the masks for the masquerade ball at the palace. They were still in the making, but once they were finished, they would be put on display. Judging by the fact that everyone was preparing for the ball, the cat realized that the prince would soon meet the main female character. His Highness ordered all staff to leave, as he wished to see everything alone. He called the cat, saying that now she could come out. This clothing store was simply luxurious. Everything in it looked so expensive. Killian asked the animal to look and asked if she liked anything. The cat was simply horrified at what the prince was going to do with women's clothes. Besides, she didn't know what girls liked. His Highness said that it was a gift, in which case the animal was even more confused about what was happening, since now there was only one girl in Killian's life. She couldn't believe that he had come to buy an outfit for Countess Catherine, even when she was poisoning his food. Even if the Countess really is a dazzling beauty, and the difference between them is only 3 years. They should be enemies, she replaced his mother, and it is obvious that they are not on the best terms. The cat didn't even want to think about the fact that the prince was doing this for the Countess only because she cooked for him. He has no idea what evil motives motivated her when she cooked for him. The cat tried to show Killian with her whole appearance that the Countess was trying to poison him, but the prince thought that she was so indignant because she did not want to buy clothes. It finally dawned on him that she was jealous, thinking that all these things were not for her. Killian suggested that the cat really didn't know that it was turning into a human when it fell asleep. In that case, it became amusing for him to keep such a secret to himself. Having sat down in the carriage, His Highness gave the order to set off. The cat was completely bewildered, not understanding what had just happened. The prince looked as if he was hiding something. She tried to understand what he was thinking, because she couldn't let her guard down. Killian offered her something tasty, and he could tell from her eyes that she was hungry, especially when she immediately pounced on the bun he gave her. Turning her attention to the prince, the cat thought that she had eaten too much, and with her gaze seemed to offer him a little. Stroking her head, he replied that he didn't like sweets, so she could eat it herself. The cat repeated to herself once again not to let her guard down, because at this rate she would soon really turn into a cat. Looking out the window, she wondered where they were going. It didn't look like they were going back to the castle. Stroking the animal's head, the prince asked her to listen to him. When they reached their destination, They would need to check something. He warned that no harm would come to her. The animal knew he was up to something. She became curious about what he was thinking about now. Because of the treats and petting, the cat wanted to sleep, and as soon as she closed her eyes, she immediately turned into a girl right in the prince's arms. It was for this reason that he covered her with a blanket beforehand. Since the time of the previous emperor, magic was considered a sinister force and was strictly restricted in its use, so even the sorcerers themselves were persecuted. That's why Killian was going to meet the mages in person to find out the truth about this strange phenomenon around this cat or girl. Judging by the fact that the cat was back in the pocket, they had arrived at their destination, Winston Lands, Duke Doyson's estate. His Highness was personally greeted by Duke Valan Doyson. The man could not even imagine that he would ever see the prince in person during his lifetime. It was a great honor for him. The Duke's son, Harris Doyson, asked His Highness the immodest question of whether the Emperor knew that he was there. In truth, the mages were isolated here in the lands of Winston, all because the royal family considered their powers sinister. The guy couldn't even imagine what the palace looked like. And suddenly, out of nowhere, His Highness, the Crown Prince, visited them. From the Duke's son's conversation, Killian understood that he was outraged. Mr. Valan immediately shut his son's mouth, apologizing to His Highness, saying that his son was still too young, so his behavior could be so disrespectful. It was only natural for the prince that the Duke's son should have a dislike for the palace. But be that as it may, the reason he had come unannounced was to check on something. I put my hand in my pocket, and Killian pulled out a kitten. All the magicians simply stared at the animal in surprise. The Duke and his son could not believe their eyes that they were looking at a real cat. They began to be indignant as to why His Highness had brought this devilish creature to them. Killian explained that he didn't care that the palace considered magic a sinister force. He wanted the magicians to find out information about the curse placed on this cat by any means possible. The cat remembered this boy. He was a young and brilliant magician who led the rebellion against Killian, who became the emperor by the end of the novel. Meeting him before the prince's coronation, this event is different from what she remembered in the novel, which means that from that moment on, she could no longer predict the future. Harris continued to shout why the prince had brought this devilish creature to them. He was going to draw his sword if it was a matter of no one in the palace wanting to get their hands dirty with blood. The Duke's son thought that this was why Killian had brought the cat to them, so that they could deal with it here. Without moving from his spot, the prince sternly asked Harris, who had given him permission to pull out his blade. The Duke was about to intervene in the conflict, but His Highness interrupted his master, saying that he should think more about the cat than about his son. Harris couldn't be stopped. He continued to shout that there were only magicians in this place, and if the prince pointed a sword at him, it didn't mean that there would be no consequences. Once again, the Duke began to ask for leniency for his son. He begged Killian to lower his sword, citing that the boy was still too young to understand the situation. Lowering his sword, the prince said that this cat belonged to him, and whoever raised his hand against it would be punished. The Duke did not understand what His Highness meant by the words "my cat." The prophecy said that cats would cause the fall of the empire, so Valan Doyson did not understand how the Crown Prince could say such a thing. Killian got tired of beating around the bush and asked what would be stronger, their magical runes or his fire that engulfed everything around him. It was the aura, the hidden power of the prince. Aura was a type of power that only high-level swordsmen could possess. However, in this world, aura was considered a power comparable to magic, so it was hidden and rarely seen outside the battlefield. Moreover, this place was full of mages who were against the imperial family. The fact that Killian used his aura here, showing himself off, could be a threat to him in the future. The Crown Prince's face showed that his nerves were on edge, and he asked once again if they would deal with the curse. The Duke obediently obeyed His Highness, begging him to remove the aura. The cat couldn't believe that this was really happening, as this situation was significantly different from the original plot. This was indeed a reality in which she had to survive. Raising his hand to the animal, the Duke felt energy. He couldn't believe it. Finally, when he finished, he informed the prince that this power was so great that no one could cope with it. This is a divine blessing. The Lord protected this cat. Everyone knew about the prophecy. Cats were considered devilish creatures deserving of death. But this cat was not cursed, but had a divine blessing. It was hard to believe, but in the Duke's humble opinion, this cat and her ancestors were able to survive for many generations because God protected them. Valan Doyson felt a powerful and ancient force that protected her. There was also a chance that the parents of this animal also existed. If she understood correctly, then the conversation was about the parents of this kitten. The Duke called his son to look at the cat's memories. With displeasure in his voice, Harris replied that he had not studied magic in order to use it on a simple animal. His father reminded him that he had taught him that all beings are equal. With a displeased look, the Duke's son approached the cat and asked His Highness for permission to touch her paw. Killian allowed it, but only the tip of his paw. It took Harris some time to read the animal's memories. He saw a magnificent palace garden, a majestic castle, and similar landscapes. After that, the very first memory. It was quite strange, but Harris saw nothing more than what he had voiced. Only one person existed in this cat's memories. This man was Crown Prince Killian Gunther. This meant only one thing, that the cat had lost her past memories. The prince inquired if it was possible to obtain more information about the divine blessing, but the Duke could not do so using magic. It seemed that the divine power inside the cat was blocking it, and he would have to look for information in another way. Killian asked to look for something related to the prophecy and the curse, but the problem was that the original manuscript of the prophecy was destroyed. The prince was confident that by working together, they would be able to get to the truth. Harris asked His Highness the reason he came here was not only to find information about the curse. It was indeed like this. As the Crown Prince, he came here with an official proposal. He handed the contract to the magicians and asked them to take their time and read it. The Duke and his son opened their mouths in surprise. The letter featured a sun, the symbol of the empire. They couldn't understand why they were chosen. Killian explained that the Doyson were the only line of mages that had not been subservient to the royal family for centuries. He needed such people, and that is why he makes an offer that will be beneficial for them. The Crown Prince promised to rebuild their academy. The previous emperor closed the academy to stop potential resistance from the mage faction, but this approach seems to be the best solution to form an alliance with the emperor. The Duke warned that if that happened, the Crown Prince might be in danger, but Killian said that he would take care of it and that the mages should just concentrate on their training. As they all knew, the empire was barely staying afloat, and now there were still secrets like this cat. It will be very difficult to fix everything, but the prince has already made a decision, and if the magicians trust him, he promises them that it will bring success and glory. With his head down, Valon Doysen said that for a mage to enter into a contract was the same as parting with his life. A mage can use powerful magic when they serve their master under contract, and the more powerful the magic, the more they will lose their sense of self-worth, the feeling that their power belongs entirely to their master. Killian didn't mean to imply that there was some grand plan behind this, like creating a great empire. He just wanted to get to the bottom of why what they saw didn't match the prophecy and what secrets were hidden behind the curse. It won't be easy, however. Valon Dason has vowed to dedicate his life entirely to carrying out the Crown Prince's orders. From that moment on, Killian Gunther became their master, and after more than 500 years, they welcomed the new master of this family. Turning to Harris, the Crown Prince gave him his first order. He handed the dresses to the magician and asked him to cast a spell on them so that they would adjust to the owner's size. The guy started asking unnecessary questions, but Killian ordered him to just do it. After just a few seconds, everything was done. Now these clothes will adapt to the person who will wear them. The Crown Prince praised Harris for his good work. The conversation was over for today, and the prince left. Once he was in his room, he called the cat to him. He handed her the dress and asked her to put it on. The cat didn't understand what was going on, why the prince was giving her human clothes, especially for her to sleep in. She began to shake her head from side to side, as it all looked very uncomfortable. It felt so good to climb onto the cool sheets without clothes and fall asleep. And now Killian was asking her to give it up. She was already depressed about being stuck in this strange world in the body of a cat. The prince realized that she didn't like it so much, and she would never wear it. He grinned and told her not to regret her decision later. Without taking his eyes off the girl lying next to him, Killian thought about how he had asked her to wear a dress, and she had refused it. Springtime May. Ever since the Crown Prince turned 19, he had taken a dangerous amount of potion, based on the original story. By that time, he would have been exhausted, in excruciating pain, and would have emitted a dark aura. Now he looked quite healthy and full of energy. The cat assumed that he had a superpower of recovery that she did not know about. An incredibly beautiful white eagle appeared in the window, with a note tied to its paw. It seemed that Killian knew this eagle, and he was waiting for him. Taking the message from his paw, He began to read it carefully. Today was also a failure. At least he received a letter saying that she would not be able to see him. It was better than remaining in the dark. The prince offered the eagle some water to drink, as he must be tired. Killian said that the name of this bird was Michelle. His mother had tamed this eagle, and his answer had to be delivered by the end of the day. The prince needed to see His Majesty, so he left the cat in the room, hoping that she would be okay. The mother wrote to her beloved son, asking for forgiveness for having to cancel the meeting and leave so suddenly. She went to the Tennessee region to recuperate. She asked her son of the empire not to worry about her mother and to focus on her duties as a ruler. This letter was from Eliza, who prays for the sun. The forest did not move when it was hit, but after the shot, it finally fell. Emperor Eugene, Adolf Gunther. He found it quite exciting to play with his prey in this way. What he saw made Killian lose his appetite, and he didn't want to look at this poor animal anymore, so he ordered him to be taken back. Chief of Staff Leon Macmillan greeted His Majesty. He apologized for interrupting his vacation, but he had an important message. Without saying it out loud, the Chief of Staff whispered something in the Emperor's ear. Adolf Gunther suddenly began to shout throughout the room. Since he had just been told that magicians were moving everywhere, he demanded an explanation from his son. Killian continued to drink his tea in complete calm, thinking that they had noticed a change in the movement of the mages. Leon Macmillan was an unprincipled and vile man who worked for Countess Catherine despite his position as Chief of Staff. The Crown Prince decided to surprise them a little and said that it was he who called the magicians. It was clear from the Emperor's expression that he did not expect his son to act like this. Killian explained that he thought it was necessary to keep them close and watch them. With the exception of the nobility, most townspeople turned to magicians with various illnesses or other less significant problems. The prince wanted to use the mages who were trusted by many citizens to gain their loyalty and the influence they had. At the end, he added that all this was only for His Majesty the Emperor. Adolf laughed and admitted that this was an excellent idea. He praised his son for having his back. Leon also agreed with this, admitting that the son's love for his father was very amazing. At this moment, Countess Catherine appeared. At that very moment, she told the Chief of Staff that he could go free as she was there to have a good time. But it was quite noisy here. Leon immediately obeyed the Countess. At that moment, Killian thought what a loser this man was. The Emperor asked his wife for what purpose she was there. As he thought she was busy preparing for the masquerade ball, Catherine referred to the fact that she had heard that a large black lion was being shown here, but it was no longer here. The prince said he had sent him to the valley, so she would look at him another time when she was free. The Emperor asked the Countess how her preparations for the ball were going, and she replied that she was trying her best. She added with a smile that if Her Majesty the Empress were here, she would take care of everything. His Majesty laughed loudly. He believed that the Countess alone was enough, and that the one who cared more about her health than about state affairs was not needed here. Killian had no choice but to support the Countess, saying that he, too, had high hopes for her work. At this moment, he was thinking about whether he should kill all those annoying people in the palace now, but it would be too generous to kill them all so quickly, so he would strangle them gradually and make them beg for death. Killian returned to the room in a bad state. The cat began to wonder what had happened during tea drinking, whether this Countess had poisoned the food again. The potion's side effects included severe nausea and severe pain, and the food consumed during the tea party must have been poisoned. In the original story, Killian began showing signs of addiction to the magic potion when he turned 19. Now was just that time. This was the most difficult moment for the prince. Painful enough to kill his own father and overthrow him. The cat thought it was so unfair, because the guy was still so young. And besides, how could he endure such pain and no one noticed? It wasn't that he hid it well, but because there was no one in the palace to protect him. All this time, Killian protects the cat when she is in danger. He is the only one who did this. Pulling off her dress and dragging it towards the master, the cat decided that she would do everything in her power for the prince. First, she had to bring down his temperature. She surrounded him with wet dresses and waited for the result, as this should help the temperature drop. The cat also wanted to sleep under a warm blanket, but she scattered the pillows that Killian had laid out for her as she ran around the room. And she had no chance to climb onto the bed. There was no other choice. At least she should put on these cat pajamas. The animal wondered whether this could be considered as her repaying him for saving her own life. In the morning, the prince woke up, and the first thing he thought about was what that wet thing was on his forehead. He was surprised that it was cat pajamas. The girl was sleeping next to his couch on the floor. She looked incredibly beautiful. Killian felt very pleased and warm in his soul that she fell asleep after taking care of him. It seemed like she was the only one who cared about him in this hellish place. The prince carefully picked her up in his arms, telling her that she was trying to get sick by sleeping on the floor, so he would take care of her. After moving the girl onto the bed, Killian wondered if he should reward her for her efforts. He named her Renette, which meant Little Queen. At least here, she ruled it like a queen, so this name suits her perfectly. When she woke up, the cat thought about how long she had been sleeping since she was already lying in bed. Without taking his eyes off her, Killian asked how she slept, calling her Renette. The cat looked at him in surprise, and the prince explained that this was now her name. She just realized that before this, she had no name in this world. With her body language, the cat began to ask Killian if he was okay. With a smile on his face, he said that everything was fine, thanks to the cat that took care of him. In gratitude, he gave her this name. As a token of gratitude, he wanted to tell her something. Finally, he told her that she turns into a human when she falls asleep. He also added that all these times she was naked, which is why he insisted on her putting on pajamas. The cat simply couldn't believe her ears. She was in complete shock from what she heard. She turned away from the prince, and he asked her if she really didn't want to see him anymore. Of course, all this was not so. She just felt ashamed that Killian saw her naked. The gentleman extended his hand towards her, trying to stroke her. He was going to explain why he hadn't told her earlier, but at that very second, the cat made it clear that she didn't want him to touch her. She felt uneasy because she did it unconsciously, but rather it was a reflex. In that case, Killian said that Renette should rest, and he was going to work in the meantime. Even though he was vigilant, the worst this cat could do was make small scratches on his skin. Turning to Renette, the prince told her to behave herself while he was gone. The cat was waiting impatiently for Killian, because what happened was only her mistake, and she was going to apologize to him for what happened. In the corridor, she heard some sound, or rather, an order for the guards to hurry and look for anything that could cause problems for the prince. The door to the crown prince's room opened. Renee froze in fear. She did not understand who dared to enter Killian's room in his absence, and even without warning. The maids whispered that they had little time. Knowing the prince, he would not talk too long with Ambassador Laverne. Of course, only Catherine Harmon could allow herself such brazen behavior. Renette managed to hide under the bed. She knew that the emperor was merciful to the countess, but she was not allowed to burst into the prince's room, and even more so, rummage through his things. The cat overheard Catherine telling the maid that there were rumors that the prince had visited the clothing store for a woman, so they came to his room to find something related to her. Finally, Renette realized that he was talking about the store where he bought her pajamas. Lady Rose intervened in this situation and asked the countess what this had to do with His Highness dating a woman. She was worried that their intervention could have unpleasant consequences. Lady Catherine did not like the girl's statement at all. She approached her and rudely asked if she had given her permission to think. She was angry that some Lady Rose was not following her instructions, but was stealing her precious time by disobeying orders. The countess was sure that the girl the crown prince was dating was not from a wealthy family. After all, if she were an aristocrat, they would have seen each other in the palace. But he met her in a clothing store, which means her background does not allow them to see each other in public. Catherine ordered that anything that seemed suspicious be brought in. After some time, the maids reported that they had not found anything special. This made the countess furious. She was sure that they had not properly inspected the crown prince's room. A young maid entered the room and apologized, as she thought that there was no one in the room, since the prince was meeting with the ambassador. Catherine haughtily asked who she was, if she was the prince's assistant, and he ordered her to keep an eye on the countess. Stuttering slightly, the maid said that this was not so, but that she had come here to clean His Highness's room. The countess was very angry that this girl entered the room without permission just to clean. The maid was almost in tears. The prince told her that she could clean when the door was open. She begged him to believe her. Catherine still didn't believe her. She was going to rip the girl's tongue out to make her start telling the truth. Lady Rose whispered in the countess's ear that the time had come, and the prince would soon return. As she left, she told the young maid that she remembered her face. The girl approached the bed, which greatly frightened Renee, who thought that she would be discovered now. It seems the maid deliberately looked under the bed, knowing that the cat was there. She hid her hand under the bed and began to look for someone. Renee sat very quietly, afraid of being discovered. The cat began to guess that this girl did not come here to clean. Just a little more and she will touch it. At that moment, the crown prince entered the room and saw this picture. He asked the maid what she was doing here. He was outraged by what was happening, because when he left, he locked the door. The maid, lowering her head, replied that when she entered the room, the door was already open. Killian ordered her to leave immediately. The maid asked His Highness for forgiveness and left. The cat immediately crawled out from under the bed. The prince picked her up and asked if she was okay and if she was hurt. The crown prince checked before leaving that the door was locked. He was sure that Countess Catherine had opened it. Renee noticed his hand. There was a trace of a scratch on it. She began to lick this place carefully. Even after the cat injured the prince, he still continued to protect her. Suddenly, light began to emanate from Killian's ring. Looking into Renette's eyes, he asked her if the cat wanted to know more information about herself. The young maid began to look around. She did not understand. This place was always in the palace garden, and why it was so quiet here. It seemed rather strange to her that everything around was so calm, as if it were an unreal world. From behind, she heard a stern male voice. It was Valon Doyson, who asked the girl how she got here. He created this space with the help of magic, and only he and the owner could enter here. It was clearly noticeable that this girl was looking for something. The maid began to make excuses that everything was wrong, and that she had simply gotten lost, and that was all. And that was why she had ended up here. The Duke did not believe her, and immediately asked if she was by any chance looking for a cat. The girl immediately began to justify herself by saying that she had no idea what this man was talking about. The Duke warned her that it would be better to tell the truth, because his master doesn't like to waste time beating around the bush. The girl bowed her head and greeted the crown prince. He immediately realized that this was the maid who had previously rummaged through his room. This stranger's name was Irene, and it seems she didn't find what she was looking for in his room. The maid repeated again that she was just cleaning. Killian sternly said that she was simply wasting their time by telling another lie. Moving closer to her face, he angrily whispered to her to quickly answer who she worked for. The maid began to swear that she was not a spy and could not tell them anything. It seems the girl didn't quite understand that this was not a polite request, but an order. Renette wondered what she should do as Killian was starting to get angry. She had to do something, or he would kill this maid. The prince realized that there was no point in delaying this, and began to take out his sword. Renette couldn't allow him to be a ruthless tyrant. At that very second, she jumped out of his pocket and hung on the sword. She tried to show the prince that she didn't like the fact that he was going to kill a man. Duke Valon Doyson could not believe his eyes that His Highness had taken a cat with him. He didn't even think that he could be caught, as he believed that the interested party should also be present. Irene froze in surprise at what she saw. This maid didn't look like someone who was afraid of a cat. It must have been the first time she had seen this animal in her life. The girl ran to the cat to snatch it from the prince's hands. The Duke only had time to shout to warn His Highness. The maid ran up to the cat, tears streaming from her eyes. She couldn't believe that she was alive. She called Renette her baby. The maid put the cat in the garden and told her that if anyone passed by, she should hide, and if they tried to grab her, she should run. In the evening, the girl returned, but the cat was no longer in the garden. She became worried because the animal usually ran out when she called it. The maid was overcome with a wave of panic and worry. Her baby was missing. After hearing this story, the crown prince understood everything that happened when he found Renee and took her with him. Tears were still flowing from the girl's eyes. She already thought that she had lost her baby forever, but she could not even imagine that Renee had lost her memory and had been with Killian all this time. The maid hugged the animal very tightly. She was worried that the baby was very scared due to the loss of memories. The girl was incredibly happy that their lives were saved. She didn't know how she could thank His Highness for such a thing. Killian said that since the girl was Renee's mother, she must be a cat too, which meant she could thank him by answering a few questions. The prince wondered if there were any other cats besides the two of them, but the girl replied that there were not. After the prophecy was announced, cats began to be destroyed. At that moment, even magicians came for them. By that time, all the other cats were killed. Killian asked if the girl was talking about the prophecy that cats were destroying the world. After a case in which cats were reported to kill children and sacrifice them to a demon, they began to be considered devilish creatures. Renette hoped it was just a story she was listening to, but she still felt sad and guilty. She felt sick, as if she had seen this before. This sadness, this feeling of guilt, it was unclear to whom they belonged. Turning his attention to Renee, Killian asked if she was okay or if something was wrong. The girl asked the prince if he himself had named her cat Renette, The gentleman confirmed this, but now that it turned out that the cat had a mother, he asked what her real name was. It turned out that the maid had not yet called her by any name, all because they were cursed. Killian was extremely surprised and asked to tell more about it. The meaning of the curse was that they would turn into cats. At night, when the red moon rises, they become pregnant. This was the punishment they had to bear. Unfortunately, the girl did not know the details of this story. The Duke intervened in the conversation, saying that the red moon appears once every 70 years. The last time this happened was 18 years ago, in the year 511, according to the imperial calendar. The girl confirmed that 10 months later, she gave birth to a child, and she is now 89 years old. The cat couldn't understand if this meant that she, too, would not grow old and would become pregnant during the red moon. Renee will be fully grown in a year, which also means that the girl has the same amount of time left on this earth. They were born as human children and grew up just like them. When they reached 20 years of age, their appearance ceased to change, and so they remained for the rest of their lives. 90 years. Killian understood how their life cycle worked, but he didn't understand how it related to the fact that the girl hadn't yet given Renette her name. It turned out that something unexpected happened. They looked like people while they were awake and turned into cats when they fell asleep. However, this child had a different curse than the others. The cat was completely shocked by what she heard. She did not understand why she was different from the others. That's why the girl wanted to give her a name after she solved this problem, but she didn't find any information and couldn't name her somehow. Based on this story, it turns out that nothing like this has ever happened before. Nothing the girl knew helped, but there was one place where all the information they needed was located. It was obvious that Irene was very nervous. After all, she had just revealed her and her daughter's secret to the Crown Prince. Raynette placed her paw on her hand, indicating that she was supporting her. Turning to His Highness, the girl asked him to take her to the Imperial Archives. She understood that entry into it was prohibited. However, it was the most suitable place where they could find at least something. Turning to the Duke, the prince asked if he could teleport them there. Valon could have done it, but he was worried that they might get caught. Killian promised that he would personally take care of this. Irene was incredibly grateful to His Highness. The prince told the girl that she had nothing to thank him for, since he was doing this in order to find out the truth. However, he asked the maid what their plan was. The girl didn't understand what he meant. Since Renee has found her true family, she will have to say goodbye to Killian. Irene said she would have a request for His Highness. She wanted the cat to stay with him until they reached the Imperial Archives. Since the girl was just a servant, it would be quite difficult for her to hide her baby. The girl was convinced that she would be safer with the prince, as she had been all this time. Taking the cat in his arms, he promised to take care of her that evening. Killian gave instructions that they would go to the Imperial Archives tomorrow morning. Irene didn't know how she could thank His Highness for such help. Looking at the prince, Renette wondered if he really agreed to part with her. After carefully examining Killian's room, the cat thought that this was the last time she would see her. When he got out of the shower, he noticed that the cat was still awake, waiting for him. Seeing his naked torso, she tried with her whole appearance to show him to cover himself. Leaning towards Renee, Killian asked with a smile on his face if she wanted to sleep with him that night. He laughed and added that, of course, he would let her wear her pajamas. That night, as before, Raynette went to bed with the Crown Prince. For a long time, she could not sleep. Without taking her eyes off him, Killian felt it and asked if she was asleep. At that very moment, she pretended to be asleep, but the prince reminded her that she turned into a human when she fell asleep. The guy admitted that since he shares his bed with a cat, he no longer suffers from nightmares. Gently stroking Renee's head, he said that although it was too late to talk about it, he was very glad that he had her. The cat felt the same, but unfortunately, she couldn't say it. She really didn't want to say goodbye to him. The next morning, Duke Valon was late, and because of this, Killian was unhappy. The gentleman asked for forgiveness, because he had to go around the guards. The Duke was surprised that the prince hid the cat, although there was no one else there. Looking down, Killian replied that it was all because Renette was shy. Finally, everyone was assembled and they could set off. The Crown Prince warned that it would not be easy. A split second later, they teleported to the Imperial Archives. Killian was outraged that security was so weak in the place where the Imperial family lived. The Duke's son said that there were several weak points in the palace's magical defenses, and the prince promised to fix this when he became emperor. In any case, it seemed good to him that they had somehow gotten here. It was decided to begin the search. Killian ordered to find any information about the cats that they could. Even though the security system is quite weak, they did a good job of hiding the documents. Duke Valon did not sense any magic book. They decided that they needed to put more effort into finding the information they needed. Raynette noticed the huge number of books. It would take a long time to look through every book here. The girl saw her daughter and asked if she had found anything here. Irene wondered what could help them in this situation. The girl opened the prayer book about the great empire of Eugene. The Duke stopped her, as he felt the energy that emanated from this book. The content didn't seem all that special. It said that the one who stole priceless souls must pay with his own by spending 8 days in darkness and 9 nights. The girl suddenly realized that this was the very book she had been looking for, and this was the same prophecy she had heard. Her mother told her that she was the 8th child, and if this was the prediction she was thinking about, then the 9th child was her little Renee. The cat could not believe her ears that she was the very 9th child of the prophecy. She decided to look at the text of the prediction again. Maybe there was some other important information there. Suddenly, a bright beam of light began to emanate from the book. Renee began to hear some voice, as if she was drawn into this book. She was in the space inside the book. Someone put their power into this book to tell the story to the child of the 9th night in the future. If we were talking about the future, then most likely this is a message from the past. It turned out that Renette was being waited for the one who was destined to save the empire. These words seemed strange, because according to the prophecy, cats were destroying the empire. Besides, she had a curse, unlike other cats. This was the proof that Renette was a child of the night. In the space of the book, she was asked to find the true prophecy, which was damaged. The cat fell into a complete stupor, because she did not understand who she was talking to and where to look for this prophecy. She was protected by divine blessing and could fix everything. Renette had to find the original manuscript and free herself from the shackles of the curse and suffering. It was also said in space that if she met his descendant, she should help him see the future. At this point, the space said goodbye to her and wished her good luck. Renette woke up from the Crown Prince's scream. He was so glad that she was okay, as she had been unconscious for a long time. It turned out that His Highness had lost consciousness, along with the cat at the same time. Since Renette had come to her senses, the prince was going to explain everything. The Duke and his son began to whisper among themselves that he had put all his power into a book, and only high priests could do that. If they add up all the things they talked about, the name sounds familiar. Prince Killian did not understand who was being talked about. The original scroll of prophecy was damaged a week after it was created. The priest who died protecting the scroll was Phoebe Nellis. This must be him. The Crown Prince decided to find Phoebe Nellis's descendant. No matter where he was now, no matter who he was, they were going to find him no matter what. 5 days have passed since then. Thanks to Valon, they found him quickly enough and were almost there. From the look on Renette's face, Killian could tell that something was bothering her. The cat was simply furious. The prince didn't see a problem with this, since she was a cat, and it was dangerous for her to be outside. So he decided to dress her up so that she would look like a rabbit, at least at first glance. Renette felt it was unfair, and she felt like she was being bullied. Killian was embarrassed. The cat was so funny. When they arrived at their destination, the prince was surprised, because it was said that the descendant of Phoebe Nellis was 16 years old, and the place smelled of alcohol. As soon as Harris opened the door, he saw someone throw the guy into the corner. He was screaming for them to give him the money. The offender clearly did not want to return the money for the service that the guy performed. Killian was surprised that this guy was the very descendant of Phoebe Nellis. The Crown Prince intervened in the conflict, knocking the man face down on the floor and telling the guy that he would give him the money. The man tried to break free and insult Killian, but the gentleman warned him that he could break his neck and it would cost him nothing. In a menacing voice, the Crown Prince warned the offender that if he hit anyone else, he would make him look for his own head rolling on the ground. Phoebe's descendant Nelis was taken from this disgusting place and taken to eat. The boy was quite hungry. The prince told the boy not to hurry. No one was going to take his food away. When Killian called the boy sad, he screamed that he should not be called by that name, but simply Jack. Still, the Crown Prince could not believe that in front of him was a descendant of Phoebe Nalassa. After eating his fill, Jack said that the master had helped him and even fed him, but he never made deals without giving something in return. It was for this reason that he was ready for the prince if he told him what he wanted. Harris approached the boy and asked if he knew anything about a child whose day and night were reversed. Judging by Jack's reaction, he didn't understand what the hell was going on. Then they started asking if the boy had any family heirlooms. any special stories that his parents had told him, but he didn't know anything like that. Harris realized that this man knew nothing. Killian stood up from the table and said that it was time for them to go, ordering the Duke's son to erase Jack's memories and ordering the Duke to search for other descendants of Phoebe. As he left, the Crown Prince promised the boy that he would make sure he was paid enough to live comfortably. After all, his family had sacrificed themselves for the Empire, even producing a great priest. Jack began to protest that he did not want this kind of money. He repeated that he only accepts honest deals. He was also outraged that some stranger was going to erase his memories. Renee wondered if it was safe to say that if this guy hadn't inherited anything, then there were no clues. An idea came into the cat's head, and she stared at Jack, not taking her eyes off him. As soon as the guy saw the cat in the rabbit costume, he started screaming. Raynette jumped up and bit Jack on the cheek. She needed his blood. When he woke up, the guy simply froze in shock. In front of him was no longer a cat, but a person. At that very second, Killian approached the girl, grabbed her by the waist, and pulled her away from the guy, asking her not to come too close to him. Taking off his jacket, he threw it over Raynette. Jack was still under the impression. He continued to shout that this couldn't be true, that the cat had turned into a human. The girl was a little scared because this guy was too close. His head seemed to be breaking. He tried to find some meaning in this whole situation, but nothing came of it. The Duke asked Raynette how she had guessed this. The girl explained that there is only one thing that cannot be broken or stolen regardless of time: people themselves. Priest Nellis conveyed the answer through his distant descendant. Finally, it dawned on Jack that the cat was able to become human only thanks to him. In that case, he decided that she should reward him generously. Left alone with Renee, Killian asked why she bit him on the cheek. Slightly embarrassed, the girl said that this was the first thing she saw at that moment. The prince did not understand why she was communicating with him so formally after everything that had happened. Renee explained that when she was human, she had to act as her class required, since she was the crown prince. Before the prince could answer, someone started shouting. It was too loud, so the girl assumed that something was wrong. She stepped onto the floor with her bare feet. But at that very moment, Killian intercepted her and picked her up in his arms. Embarrassed, Renette asked the prince to let her go. The guy gently ordered her not to move, reminding her that she was barefoot. At that moment, Harris burst into the room with tears in his eyes, begging His Highness to save him. Jack didn't understand why the magician was making such a fuss over the mouse. The Duke's son said that he would rather wallow in a pigsty than end up in the same place with this miserable man. This made Jack laugh a lot, because Harris was scared of the mouse, and at the same time called him a pathetic person. The magician began to shout loudly for the boy to forget about the pigsty. Instead, he would rot in a mouse hole. The situation became very tense for those present, as the mice began to move simultaneously. Did Jack really make them behave this way? The room was in terrible disarray, as if a swarm of mice had run through it. The magicians reported that they had spent a lot of time driving out these rodents, adding that Jack had started it all first. If Renette's guess was correct, then Phoebe's descendant had the ability to control animals. The girl offered to take Jack with her. Touching his hand, Renee said that he had an ability. Speaking about the ability, Killian asked the girl if she saw how the guy controlled the mice. Raynette asked Jack if he knew his family tree. From generation to generation, his family produced outstanding priests. They even sacrificed their lives to save the Empire. She whispered to him that he was from the Nellis family. The guy was surprised because he hadn't done any of this. Renee suspected that he might have even more powerful powers. She asked if he wasn't interested in learning about his abilities. Jack was even more surprised when he heard that he was the only person who could help the girl. She added that it can also help other people. The only thing Jack asked was that if he proved useless, Renette would not take back her words. Taking the guy by the hand, she promised him this. He was about to tell why he got a new one and what difficulties he had to go through. But at that moment, everything swam before his eyes. It felt like an earthquake had happened. Raynette turned into a cat again. The prince asked the Duke why the girl had become a cat again, and he had only one guess, that the reason could have been the sudden exhaustion of Sad's strength. They had to wait for the guy to restore them to check. Duke Valon agreed with His Highness, as there was little they could do at the moment. The magician thought that the best solution would be to leave Sad in the estate. Killian asked to let him know when the boy's strength was restored, and now he and Renee were going to return to the palace. Irene saw through the window that His Highness had returned, and she wondered if they had solved the problem with the curse or not. Another maid approached the maid and said that she was being called to the reception room. Countess Catherine summoned her. Hearing this, the girl became quite frightened. Killian was very irritated by all this, but upon his return, he had one more thing to do. He asked Renette how she was feeling, and the cat showed by her appearance that she was completely fine. Stroking her head, he said that he would be back soon, but for now she could rest. Irene knocked on the door of the room, and the prince told her to come in. The girl apologized for her sudden appearance, but she had to tell him something. The crown prince noticed the maid's face. She was scared. Killian was very angry that the countess had gotten to Irene and forced her to spy on him. It was unfortunate. Now he could not trust anyone in the palace. It was tiring to be here. Still, there was one person he could trust. As soon as the prince entered his room, Renette immediately rushed to him, showing that she was very glad of his return. A smile immediately appeared on Killian's face. He carefully took the cat in his arms and suggested that they go for a walk together. They went out into the garden together. Renette was very pleased with this walk. The fir tree covered in bluish-silver light and the lake shimmering in the moonlight were so beautiful. This cold but soft landscape reminded her of Killian. Sitting down on the grass, the crown prince said that he had something for Renette. He handed her an envelope. This letter was from Irene. With sadness in his voice, the prince said that her mother had left, and she had not had the opportunity to say goodbye in person, so she asked him to give her daughter a letter. Looking at Killian, Renette thought that at that moment, he was thinking about the letter from his own mother. He looked quite sad. The cat put her paws on him, as if calming him down. Smiling slightly, the prince said that she always knew how to comfort him. It seemed the reason he stopped having nightmares was because of her ability. This all seemed unlikely to Renette, although it sounded very pleasant, since suddenly acquiring such abilities was almost impossible. To the cat's surprise, Killian began to take off his shirt. She covered her eyes with her paws, but the prince asked her to look at him. He wanted her to see it for herself. The scars on his body disappeared. Smiling, Killian said that Renette would soon make a hole in him with her gaze. In any case, he noticed this peculiarity from the moment he began to sleep next to the cat. To be more precise, from the moment they started spending time together. It was just Killian's guess, and he admitted that it could have been a coincidence. Even if that wasn't the case, Renette was still special to him. She was very pleased to hear these words. Even if she was an ordinary person, she still continued to be special to him. Upon returning to the palace, Killian was met by the butler. The prince asked what they wanted from him at such a late hour. The servants handed him a box of cookies, which were from Countess Catherine. Renette began to show him with her whole appearance that he shouldn't eat it, and then Killian began to think that there was something suspicious about it. The cat understood perfectly well that Countess Catherine had poisoned these cookies too. The crown prince asked Renette if she remembered what he said earlier about his thoughts regarding her superpowers. He decided to try one cookie to test it out. After eating one cookie, he decided to find out whether he would have nightmares that night or not. Touching Killian's forehead, Renette felt relieved. It seemed like he wasn't having nightmares. She had been very worried since he ate the cookie. She hoped that everything would be fine. In her hand was a dagger. She killed the crown prince. The child born to destroy the Eugene Empire. She killed them all. Renette woke up, noticing Killian. He didn't seem to be bothered by the nightmares, but she was seeing all these dreams instead of him. It just meant that he had been having these horrible dreams all this time. Pushing to the edge and trapping in fears, the black magic potion clearly knew how to torment its victims. A monster that would destroy the empire. These words played with her fear that Renette might actually be such a creature. She refused to believe it, but she couldn't help her thoughts. However, if she really does have the ability to take away nightmares, then it's unclear why it only started working now. The next day, Killian asked Renette if she was sure she was okay. The cat looked very tired. He asked her to tell the truth about her poor sleep. Renette began to deny it. But in that case, the prince asked what was wrong if she sat and fell asleep. The cat started pointing out the window, as if it was all because of the weather. She assured him that she was telling the truth. Although she was strangely sleepy, her head was spinning and she had difficulty breathing. Weakness overcame her, and she began to lose consciousness. Killian managed to grab her, and instead of a cat, a girl ended up in his arms. When she woke up, she realized that she had become human again. At that moment, Renette realized that she had no clothes on. Turning away, Killian took off his jacket and handed it to the girl. Throwing on his jacket, she thanked the prince, being very embarrassed. Wrapping herself in a blanket, Renette told him to turn over. The first thing the prince did was to check if there were any new messages from Valon, and the girl asked if the Duke had imagined that something like this could happen. The magician didn't expect this, but in case something did happen, they installed a magic circle for communication directly in the top drawer of the desk. The mages had just sent a letter to the prince. It said that Sad had just used his powers. It seemed there was a connection between his powers and Renee's transformation after all. At that very second, the girl turned into a cat. She just fell asleep and the transformation happened. Killian froze in confusion. If she was sleeping, then why was she still in the form of a cat? In the letter, the magicians wrote that they assumed that the use of power was associated with the sudden appearance of side effects. Of course, it was possible. However, it could be because the potion was affecting the cat instead of the crown prince. Killian replied that he would appreciate it if the mages looked into this matter further, as it could be the influence of the magic potion. The Duke warned that it was too dangerous to do this now, as Valon had been visiting the palace frequently lately, and this could arouse suspicion in His Majesty. The crown prince replied that if it was so difficult for the Duke to come to his palace, then he would come to him himself. Along the way, Killian began to wonder if this might be because he was dreaming too much. All living beings that were near him left him. The crown prince was stopped by the Emperor and Countess Catherine, and the girl asked Killian where he was heading at such a late hour. The prince pressed Renette into his pocket, greeting His Majesty. The guy replied that he was heading to the town of Cloud. Killian asked what was in the bags the guards were holding in their hands. It was clear that blood was seeping out of them. The Emperor said that it was the cub of a fox he had been hunting. Catherine was so frightened when it jumped out in the Empress's garden. The Countess confirmed this, as she thought it was a cat. His Majesty called his wife a coward. In any case, it was a relief to him that she was not a cat after all. At that very moment, this mad Emperor laughed evilly, saying that if it were a cat, this would be a great opportunity to tear it to pieces with his bare hands. Killian noticed that the bag looked quite large for a fox cub. Adolf's eyes were burning with anger. He took his son by the shoulder and said that the mother came running when he tried to kill the fox cub. Then all the other cubs crawled out after the mother. This stupid creature killed all her children trying to resist. The prince had disgusting human feelings. They locked his mother in the far corner of the palace, and now they were mocking him like this. Killian asked if the hunt was enjoyable. The Emperor replied that it was foolish to call it hunting, since it was a little entertainment for the evening. In that case, the crown prince promised to prepare some fun for next time. At that moment, his eyes were shining. He promised to prepare a hunt that would be unlike any that the Emperor and Countess had ever been to before. After these words, Killian bowed and went about his business. He swore to himself that he would never lose anything else that belonged to him. Anyone who dares to challenge him will be killed. Countess Catherine thought about the prince's words about going to the town of Cloud at such a late hour. She thought that he had rather bad taste. A woman of low social status, a surprisingly beautiful maid, who disappeared into thin air. If it was the prince who hid her, so that no one could find her, then everything falls into place. Countess Catherine told His Majesty that there was something she would like to receive. She asked to give her the fox skin. The Duke asked Killian to wait a little, as Harris would soon bring Sad. Valon asked His Highness if he would take Renette back if she woke up. The Duke was worried, as they were lucky enough to bring her here in the form of a cat. But what would happen next was highly unpredictable. If she had been human while she was asleep, it would have been much more difficult to bring her here. Valon Doyson asked Killian to consider whether it was the right decision to leave her in the palace. The current situation was dangerous for His Highness and for Madame Renette. The Crown Prince made it clear that the girl would stay with him. Before the Duke could object, Harris and Sad appeared in the room. The guy didn't really know how to wake up the cat. It turned out that His Highness had not slept all night. He was worried about this whole situation. He ordered Sad to wake up Renee. At that moment, the guy was only thinking about being given at least some kind of hint. All he could do was share his power with the girl. Even though Renee had turned into a human, she still couldn't be woken up. Killian asked Harris if he could try to read the girl's memories. He needed to check something. The magician apologized in advance for having to touch Renee and got down to business. Harris screamed, "What the hell?" Then he jumped away from Renee and grabbed his mouth with his hand. Everyone was dead. This woman killed everyone, and in the end, she killed the Crown Prince. It turns out that Killian knew this. This is because it was the same dream he had every night until he met Renee. The girl was now seeing his dreams instead of him. The girl jumped out of bed. An unknown voice asked her if she had a nightmare. With tears in her eyes, she asked how he knew about it. It was all because she was still in the nightmare. She was blamed for everything, for being the cause of death, for all of this being because of her. The voice ordered her to raise the dagger. Take it and stick it into your heart. In that case, all the pain would go away. The voice wanted Renee to end it all with her own hands. She agreed, thinking that this would make things easier for her. Then, she heard Killian's voice telling her it was time to wake up. The girl woke up from the touch of his warm and strong hand. She wanted to pronounce his name, but she couldn't. A hellish pain arose in her throat. At that very second, the prince rushed towards her, asking what was wrong. He looked scared. Renee couldn't breathe. Killian begged her to look at him. After that, he kissed the girl tenderly. The prince's breath flowed into her. The duke asked if everything was all right with the lady. Phelan Doyson advised the crown prince to get some sleep. Killian pretended not to hear his words and immediately said that he had a plan. He was going to introduce Renette to society. When the prince returned, he asked if the girl was still sleeping. The maid replied that Renette was still asleep and that she had slept the entire time Killian was gone. Irene finally remembered what she wanted to tell her daughter. It was a story about a bleeding tree that was passed down from generation to generation. The maid hoped that this would be the key to breaking the curse, and if so, she promised to tell it as soon as Renette woke up. Killian promised to take care of Renee and sent the girl to rest. At that moment, she woke up. At that very second, the prince jumped up to her and said that he was very worried. He gently touched her forehead to check that she didn't have a fever. Killian was worried because her cheeks were red. Renette replied sheepishly that she was fine, but the prince still asked her not to strain herself. The guy said that yesterday Irene wanted to tell her something. It was a story about a bleeding tree, but she didn't remember all the details, and while Renee was sleeping, they studied all the information about the magic potion. At that moment, Sad burst into the room. The guy looked indignant. He asked the girl why she slept for so long, referring to the fact that it was very difficult for him. He trained a lot to control his powers, and considered it his merit that Renée was now a human. Sad also believed that it was thanks to him that she woke up. The girl laughed and thanked the guy. She asked him how he was feeling. Since the last time he used his powers, he felt dizzy. Killian was angry. He couldn't stand this guy, and even more so the fact that he was communicating with his Renette, so he immediately shouted at him to get out. Elam was the name of a potion that brought out one's deepest fears through nightmares. If Countess Catherine made this potion herself, it meant that she had magical abilities. If that were true, then the Royal Bureau of Magical Regulation would already be monitoring her. Killian asked if there was a possibility that the Countess had formed an alliance with the Bureau. Renette intervened in the conversation, saying that Catherine had no magical abilities. The girl said that some time ago, she had sneaked into His Highness's room, and she was determined to find out something about the Crown Prince. If she had powers, she would have detected the magic on Renee's clothes and would have looked for it, but she couldn't find anything. The Duke said that in that case, it meant that someone had given this potion to the Countess. It may have been Macmillan, as he had a good relationship with Countess Catherine. Killian believed that Leon Macmillan was just a parasite on the political system, and that he would not have the courage to do something so bold. Renette asked if there was anyone else who could help the Countess. The prince replied that in order to understand this, they needed a list of guests invited to the masquerade ball. It was then that Countess Catherine truly revealed herself. Renette agreed that the secret assistant could be on that list. To get into the royal ball, one had to be directly invited, and someone had to have the support of Countess Catherine to get on that list. The thing is, she was now in charge of the list, and that's because whoever was in charge of organizing the ball was also in charge of the guest list. The Duke asked if the Hamiltons had not taken care of this. It seemed quite interesting to Killian. The reason Countess Catherine took on this role was because the Hamiltons suddenly disappeared. Renette, Phelan Doyson, and Harris simply opened their mouths at what they heard. Since Queen Eliza's condition began to deteriorate, the palace needed someone to take on the role of organizer of the Royal Masquerade Ball. At first, a couple of Hamiltons were hired for this position. The truth was that the Hamiltons and those who supported them were involved in corruption and bribery. When this couple disappeared, Countess Catherine took charge of the internal affairs of the royal palace, her tyranny becoming more and more flagrant and insolent. Renette didn't know that the corruption in the palace was so serious. Lost in thought, the girl didn't even notice how Killian entered the room and stood over her. She immediately stood up and asked him when he had managed to enter. The prince replied that Renette did not respond to the knock. It seemed that the girl was so deeply immersed in her thoughts that she didn't even notice someone opening the door. Renee asked Killian if he had come here to scold her for her carelessness. The Crown Prince said that of course not. He asked the girl what she was thinking about. She said that she thought about what they had discussed earlier. Renette came to the conclusion that it would be difficult to get hold of the guest list, which was in the Countess's possession. Besides, she had a feeling that the one who was helping her was even more insidious than she was. The girl did not know if they would be able to find the Hamiltons. She wondered if they were alive. Giving Renee a light hug, Killian asked if she knew that mages could track down someone who uses magic. Just now, the Crown Prince gave her hope that it would be easy enough to find the Hamiltons. Of course, it sounded great. But at that moment, Renee was bothered by the fact that the prince was too close to her. In truth, ever since she regained consciousness, her memories had been gradually returning. She decided to take her mind off this and asked Killian why he came here. Before the Crown Prince was about to leave, he wanted to tell Renee something. It was hard for him to say this, but the girl had to stay here for a while. At that moment, she became very anxious at the thought that she was left here alone, without him. Worried, she asked Killian if he made this decision because she had become human, and in this form, it was not so easy to hide her. The Crown Prince explained that this was not the case, and that this was not the reason, since the way she looked was not the problem. It was all because Renette had something to do in the next 15 days. Gently taking her nose, Killian said that Duke Valon would explain everything to her, so there was no need to worry. Smiling, the girl expressed hope that these 15 days would fly by unnoticed. She had not realized this until now, because they were always together. Renee trusted the prince unconditionally. Killian admitted that for him, these 15 days will be an eternity. The girl was extremely surprised when she learned that she would have to come to the masquerade ball in human form. Sad's power wasn't perfect, but Renee would be able to remain human as long as he stayed awake, so it was time to stop hiding. However, she thought it was too much, but Killian reassured her by saying that Duke Barney would help them. Even though it was one of the very few duchies that existed in the Empire, they rarely ventured beyond their estate. The Duke is married, but they have no children, so Renette will be introduced as the daughter of this family. She began to worry that someone might suspect something was wrong with her. Killian took her hand and said that her name was now Renette Barney. He gave her hope that she could do it. When the Crown Prince was leaving, the girl went out onto the balcony to wave to him, but Killian didn't quite like this gesture, as he began to worry that she might fall. Duke Valon asked the prince why he shouldn't answer her, since Renette was waving her arms at him so much. The gentleman replied in a barely audible voice that he would not do that. The Duke was surprised by this answer, because they would not see each other for some time. With a smirk on his face, Killian added that for this young lady waving her arms from the balcony, these 15 days will fly by. The Crown Prince ordered the Duke that as soon as they found any information about the Hamiltons, they were to immediately inform him. Valon reported that his son had already taken care of the carriage driver's memories. In the Eugene Empire, black magic was forbidden. For a long time, Killian believed that everything connected to her had been completely destroyed. The Crown Prince decided to ask the magician if he wanted to know information about black magic that was not available to the general public, where he would go to find it. After thinking for a moment, the magician replied that in that case, he would first check the palace archives. Countess Catherine asked for permission to access them, and of course, the emperor granted it. According to Renee, Catherine has no magical abilities, and in order to use black magic, she must have some kind of magical item. Palace archives. The answer was in the archives. The countess couldn't find the damn thing. There were so many books in the archive that needed to be looked at. This ring always confused her. It had human blood in it and all that stuff. She found information about Phoebe Nellis, but she couldn't figure out who he was. When Catherine touched the book, she felt incredible pain, which meant she had to continue searching. The butler came to the archives and received a message that the emperor was looking for the countess. The girl hated the emperor with all her heart, but always pretended that she doted on him. Turning to the butler, she made a sweet face and said that her beloved could not live without her for a minute. She was pleased with herself, even though she didn't know what the book was about. But finding it wouldn't be that hard. Once the entire palace was in her hands, combing through the library would be a piece of cake. Corn soup was waiting for Renelle again for breakfast. Irene said that this was her daughter's favorite soup. The girl smiled politely at her mother, but that didn't mean she wanted to eat that soup every day. She just thought it was tasty because it reminded her of corn chowder. At that moment, she thought about Killian, whether he was eating well, Renate hoped that the prince had not eaten anything poisoned. If he answered her letters, she wouldn't be so worried. She waited for a response from him, but the crown prince never sent a single letter. This was even more worrying because he said it was hard to detect magic potion in food. Renee really hoped that Killian wasn't starving to death. The girl wondered if it was possible that she had a super sense of smell. Said asked her why she was sniffing. Did he really smell bad? Without waiting for an answer, Harris told him to wash himself. The guy was outraged, since he had just washed himself yesterday. Renee was amused by the complicated relationship between these guys. She decided that she should concentrate on her work. The reason she stayed here was only because she needed to finish her work. Still, she was a little disappointed. Renee thanked Harris for the lesson. The magician said that tomorrow he would check what the girl remembered from today. He also gave her homework. The girl was already exhausted, but thanked the guy for what he was doing for her. Since his father was away, he had to take on the matter personally. Harris asked Renate that if she saw Sad, she should tell that bastard to go to the magician. The girl found the guy in the garden, where he was skipping classes. As soon as he saw the girl, he immediately started shouting that he was on break and that he was not skipping classes at all. Renate asked him if he found these activities difficult. All this seemed boring to Sad. They studied only strange texts and nothing useful about animals. The girl realized that this guy loved animals very much. She decided to ask him if he knew anything about plants. She was interested in information about the bleeding tree. Said replied that he had never heard of such a thing. The boy called the bird to him and said that if Renee wanted to know something about plants, then he should ask the animals that live in the wild. The girl called Sad a genius and promised that she would not tell anyone that he skipped classes. This guy could talk to animals. Now there was even more chance to find out something about the curse. Renette was sure that Killian would be happy too. The moment when the girl hugged Sad was seen by the crown prince. He called out to Renee. She immediately turned around and froze. She did not expect to see his highness now. She asked with hope in her voice whether he had come for her or not yet. Killian said he was just dropping by because someone had written to him expressing anger. In the letter, Renee wrote that if he didn't answer her, she wouldn't tell him a funny story. The girl immediately began to justify herself by saying that she was very worried about him. She reminded Killian that she had asked him to tell her how he was feeling. This is exactly why he came. It was at this time. Renette couldn't believe her ears that the crown prince had come all this way just because of her letter. At that moment, Harris appeared and asked his highness what he was doing there. But then his attention fell on Sad, and he began to shout where the guy had been all this time. The magician was very angry that Sad dared to skip lectures. Killian invited Renette to go into the room, adding that if he was not mistaken, then she despised him too. The girl immediately asked indignantly whether he had slept poorly, but the prince replied that he had slept very well. Then Renette put her finger to his face and called him a liar who was trying to deceive her. She knew the truth very well, since the black bags under his eyes said otherwise. And besides, he was completely pale. The girl poured warm tea for Killian and handed him a mug. The prince noticed that Renette had learned how to brew it. Putting her hand on her heart, the girl admitted that she studied hard. While drinking tea, the crown prince asked her how she was living here. She didn't want him to worry, so she replied that overall everything was great, and she really liked it there. In a stern voice, Killian replied that he would still take her to the palace, even if she was comfortable here. Renee didn't quite understand such pressure. Of course she had to go back, since she had nowhere else to go. After a few seconds, it dawned on her that the prince would take her back because she wanted to continue being here. She immediately began to explain that she was serious about her studies in order to return to the palace, repeating that she already wanted to return as soon as possible. Renette let out a small breath, hoping that her words had made everything clear. However, she was alarmed that the prince did not look completely sleepy, and she specially brought him tea to help him go to bed. She asked His Majesty if he was feeling sleepy, and he replied that he was not. It all seemed very strange, because when Renee drank this tea, she immediately fell asleep. She had no other choice. The girl did not want to resort to this. Finding himself on top of Killian, the prince froze in bewilderment. He asked Renee what she was doing. The girl apologized in advance and lay down with her whole body on him. At that moment, the crown prince understood what it was like when people said their hearts skipped a beat. Killian asked why she was doing this. Renette said that she wanted the prince to sleep well. At the very least, he had to praise her for her determination. She thanked him for the compliment, then stood up, preparing to leave, as she had persuaded Killian to lie down. grabbing her by the waist and pulling her closer to him. The prince asked what would happen if he didn't let her go, because he didn't feel like sleeping at all, especially after that. Renette pretended not to understand what he meant at all, because the tea she poured for him helps him fall asleep. The girl began to cover Killian's eyes with her hands. Now he understood why she had been looking at the cup so strangely all this time. He asked what would happen if she got stuck in a nightmare again, like last time. Nobody knew how it would end this time, but in any case, you can't stay cheerful forever. So, His Highness simply had to trust her and sleep. When he woke up, he didn't see Renette next to him. Killian stood up and went to look for his Renette. Coming out into the corridor, the prince noticed her there. Just as he was about to call her, someone else appeared on the horizon. It was sad. Renee asked the boy if his lesson was over yet. He replied that yes, since he promised not to skip. The girl praised him for his efforts. She looked so calm. Killian had never seen such an expression on Renette's face before. He was one of those who had been with her from the very beginning. But with him, she did not feel free. The crown prince felt pain in his soul because the girl behaved like that around this brat. At that moment, she noticed His Highness. Approaching him, she asked how he had slept, saying that she was very glad that Killian had managed to get some sleep. Smiling, the prince said that it was all thanks to her. Renette assumed that he was still feeling tired, or that he was in a bad mood. Before she had time to ask him anything, Harris ran up to the couple and said that his father had returned. The Duke found the Hamiltons. For now, they brought them to this forest house, but Harris asked Killian to be extremely careful, as it seemed that these people were mentally unstable. Opening the doors a little, the prince heard cries for someone to be released. These people shouted that common people did not dare touch them. Seeing this picture, Renette realized that this was not how she had imagined the Hamiltons. This couple managed the royal household and wielded enormous power. Now they have reached such a miserable state that Countess Catherine must have done something terrible to them. Renee covered her nose with her hand and closed her eyes. Killian asked what was wrong with her. These people reeked of dark magic potion. Hamilton shouted that as soon as he returned to the palace, he would immediately execute these insignificant fools who dared to detain him. At that very moment, he saw His Highness. He bowed before the crown prince and said that he had committed an irreparable folly, begging him for mercy. Killian asked if they really thought that he had found them only in order to punish them. Hamilton begged for mercy and vowed that he would never take bribes again. The prince turned to Vallon and asked how they found them. The Duke tracked these people using magic, and then discovered a suspicious wall in the basement of their estate. He destroyed it and found the Hamiltons locked inside. Killian was surprised by the presence of an underground warehouse and wondered if it was possible that they were hiding to avoid being accused of embezzlement. Considering the significant amount of dark magic potion found in the food, it is likely that they did not hide themselves, but rather the Countess imprisoned them. Hamilton's wife shouted out Catherine's name. The woman became furious and screamed for Countess Catherine to die. With the help of magic, the Duke tried to pacify this madwoman. Hamilton kept saying that it was all Catherine's fault, that they were locked up because of her. Renette realized that this woman mistook her for the Countess. Something serious must have happened between them to cause such strong hatred, even in an altered state of consciousness. Killian couldn't take it anymore. He ordered Hamilton to confess before his patience snapped. He wanted this man to tell him everything he had seen and been involved in, as well as the crimes committed by Countess Catherine. The man called the Countess an evil woman. There was something suspicious about her from the very beginning. For example, she appeared out of nowhere as a commoner, entered the palace, and gained power. The power and influence that supported Countess Catherine must be connected to the royal masquerade where she appeared. Killian was interested in who sent her the invitation. Hamilton swore he wanted to tell everything, but he had no idea who wrote the letter. All he saw was Catherine handing it to him. She was alone, without any accompaniment. The crown prince was interested in what was in the letter. It said that Catherine could join the ball. She also asked that Minister Cleaver MacLean be appointed as her escort. Renette didn't remember seeing anyone with that name in the original novel, and she felt like she was becoming paranoid. The strange thing was that as soon as the rumor spread that His Majesty liked Catherine, Minister MacLean came to Hamilton and asked who she was. Contrary to what was written in the letter, he did not seem to know her at all. Later, when the man saw them together, the minister seemed to grovel before Catherine. This all became clear, but the only thing that was unclear was how the Hamiltons ended up locked in the basement. As Catherine gained His Majesty's favor and confidence, their position naturally became more and more precarious, and it was at this point that the girl proposed spending a year's vacation abroad. She said that if she managed to capture the royal house during this time, she would reward the Hamiltons when they returned. It was almost a threat, not an offer. The couple couldn't come up with a good enough excuse to refuse, and then they started to leave when a stranger approached them. They lost consciousness and woke up in the basement. They wanted to die, but they couldn't. When the Hamiltons regained consciousness, they ate the food that was there, as if they were possessed by something. The man thanked His Majesty for pulling them out of hell. Killian ordered the Hamiltons to stay in this house for a while. His eyes blazed with anger. He promised that he would find Cleaver McLean, whoever he was. That's it. The preparations for the masquerade ball were complete. Irene told her daughter that she would be the most beautiful at this event. She knew that Her Highness would protect Reinette, but she still asked that the girl be as careful as possible there. Before leaving, the daughter asked her mother to wish her good luck. The palace was already in sight. Reinette couldn't believe that she was going to the palace in human form. The girl's task was that His Majesty the Emperor had to notice her at the ball. She didn't understand how Killian could just throw this at her and leave. The prince repeated that he was passing through and needed to return to the palace and cook something. Reinette reminded him again that she could turn into a cat, and besides, she was not a real aristocrat. She was afraid she would not cope with this task. Killian gently stroked her head and told her not to worry, as he would definitely cope with this task. The girl asked how he would feel the magic potion without her. Duke Valon told her that for the potion of dark magic, the antidote could only be made by the one who created the bottle. Reinette was very worried that the prince would drink another potion while she was away. Killian assured her that everything would be fine, as her safety was the most important thing to him. It wasn't that good. The prince didn't know how to find the magic potion. Renee had to find the antidote. Since it could be made by the one who made the black magic potion, perhaps the girl could find something in Countess Catherine's room. This was her chance since she was now in the palace. Reinette looked at the whole crowd and thought about how she could find Killian, since she wanted to talk to him about the antidote. The Duke whispered to the girl that Leon Macmillan was there, and even if he was the head of security, he was still on Countess Catherine's side. This pitiful mask was very suitable for a coward. Reinette decided to climb the stairs and look for the Crown Prince. She should have asked what mask he planned to wear, but unfortunately she didn't. A guy approached Renee from behind, whispering in her ear who his mistress was looking for. The girl immediately realized that it was Killian's voice. Smiling slightly, Renee asked him who he was. The Crown Prince whispered to her that he was the one who could not sleep without her. Laughing, the girl asked him how he recognized her so immediately. Killian replied that he simply felt it. Reinette was surprised and asked if he had seen her mask before. But the prince did not need to do this, since he would have recognized his mistress anyway. Countess Catherine was watching this moment, and she immediately realized that the girl in the angel mask was the one she needed. That girl with silver hair, she saw that she herself crawled back. Renee asked to forget about the mask. Since it was not important now, she wanted to ask Killian something. Her gaze fell on the girl in the red dress. She immediately realized that it was Countess Catherine. Reinette felt the Countess's gaze burning into her. The girl grabbed Killian's hand and said that it would be better for them to talk somewhere else. The Countess laughed, thinking that this couple should run away while they could. She knew perfectly well that there was no place in the palace where she could not find them. Finally, they got far enough away. Suddenly, the stranger's hair caught on a button on Killian's jacket. The girl began to pull them out, stumbled and fell right on the Crown Prince. Their masks came off, and they found themselves facing each other. Renee covered her mouth with her hands. She knew this girl. Hair as red as roses, eyes as golden as the sun. She must be the original novel's female protagonist, Vanessa Enclair. In the novel, the Crown Prince and Vanessa first met at a masquerade ball. They began to get closer as Killian began to untangle her hair. The Crown Prince called for Renee to come to him and help him. The girl was extremely surprised that he was forcing her to do it, although he could do it himself. After some time, Reinette finally untangled Vanessa's hair. Killian breathed a sigh of relief, adding that it would be easier if they cut them off. Vanessa Enclair only now realized that the Crown Prince stood before her. She picked up his mask from the floor and began to offer her deepest apologies for not recognizing him and for making a mistake. Killian reassured her that everything was fine. It was just a misunderstanding. Even though these people met for the first time, they seemed to be quite compatible with each other. Vanessa was the main character who truly deserved to be with Killian. Renee experienced a strange feeling at that moment. Suddenly, Vanessa loudly shouted the name Duchess Barney. She begged the Duchess of Barney's pardon for being late in greeting her. But with His Highness's permission, she begged to be allowed to greet the girl properly. Renette replied that she was very pleased to meet Lady Vanessa. Lady Unclair was greatly honored to meet the Duchess of Barney and asked her and the prince if they were attending the ball as partners. Without waiting for an answer, the girl assumed that they were lovers. Vanessa admitted that she couldn't help but notice how His Highness looked at Renette without taking his eyes off her. The girl began to vehemently deny it. Supposedly, they had known each other for a long time, but were not lovers. She called Killian her friend, and it so happened that he was a man. Vanessa Ankler apologized for catching the couple off guard with her rude question and jumping to conclusions. The lady immediately remembered that she had something to do, so she said goodbye to the couple, saying that she hoped they would see each other again. Killian asked his companion if she really hated the fact that they were mistaken for lovers. Renette replied briefly that she was merely clarifying a misunderstanding, and then said that she needed to rest for a bit. The situation at the moment has deviated far from the original plot, but still, Vanessa and Killian found each other, as if it was fate that brought them together. So it wouldn't be surprising if they kept running into each other as the main characters and eventually fell in love. Unlike Renee, who was cursed, the girl wondered where she would go if she couldn't be with Killian. At this moment, the Crown Prince approached Renee. He told her that she made him worry. Killian was determined to find out what was going on, and he also noticed that Renette was crying. The girl replied that she was just tired. If she said so, then the Crown Prince thought that everything was indeed fine. He carefully put the mask on her and asked her not to take it off from that moment on, no matter what happened. Before Renee could find out the reason for such a request, Duke Valon knocked on the balcony window. He came to announce that His Serene Highness the Emperor had arrived. Everyone greeted His Majesty Emperor Adolf. Renette couldn't believe her eyes. Countess Catherine was sitting next to the Emperor in the Empress's place. Haris told her that the Empress attended such events to demonstrate royal grandeur and power. However, she was not present at this event, and Countess Catherine sat in her place. There was clearly something wrong here. Renette turned her attention to Vanessa, who had removed her mask. The girl asked Duke Valon if they should take off their masks in front of His Majesty. The magician explained that if someone wanted to greet the Emperor, they could take off their mask. Many aristocrats wanted to show their faces to be recognized. Countess Catherine kept her eyes on Vanessa. In the original novel, Lady Unclair stood out against the background of the Countess, as a result of which the lady made her an offer. It was a tempting offer to appoint her as a maid of honor to the Empress. It turned out that there was one nuance. Only if one of the maids was removed. Then Vanessa could take her place. Renette clearly remembered the name of the maid who donated her place for the girl. This is Countess Candy. She was the closest assistant to Her Majesty the Empress. Apparently, she was at the event with her husband, since Her Majesty was absent today. If Countess Catherine has the same plan, then Countess Candy may be in danger. Renette approached the Count and Countess to meet them. It was a surprise for the Count to meet anyone from the Barney family at the event. The girl said she was very glad to meet the couple, admitting that she had always wanted to meet Countess Candy in particular. This woman was known for her unwavering loyalty to the Empress, so Renette wanted to try to get closer to her by saying something good about the Empress. The girl confessed to the Countess that she had always looked up to Her Majesty the Empress, and naturally, she wanted to meet Lady Candy, since she is Her Majesty's most trusted person. From the Countess's face, Renette thought that she had gone too far, and should have addressed the woman with more sincerity. She began to talk about how Her Majesty was doing so much to ensure peace and prosperity for the Empire, and she wanted to follow her example, so the girl reads and meditates to maintain peace of mind. It seemed that Renette's delirium had worked, for Countess Candy smiled and said that Lady Barney had turned out to be much more interesting than she had imagined. The lady said that since it was her first time at the palace, she hoped to meet girls her own age, and she asked the Countess if her daughter was eating. If Renee remembered everything correctly, then the Countess definitely had a daughter, because in the novel, Countess Catherine planned to send Countess Candy to Bern to see her daughter, and then kill her on the way. The woman said that she does indeed have a daughter, but she is already married and even gave birth to a child the night before. The Countess and her husband were supposed to leave for Bern tomorrow to see their daughter and grandson. By carriage, this journey took half a day. Since they were leaving tomorrow at noon, they would most likely be there closer to sunset. Renette knew she had little time, but if she could stop Countess Catherine's plan for tomorrow, she could save Candy's family. She had to do it. The same Countess Catherine approached Lady Barney from behind. Without even saying hello, the Countess immediately asked the girl's name. Duke Valon saw all this and began to call the lady, but she showed him a hand gesture that meant that everything was fine. With confidence in her voice, Renette introduced herself to the Countess. With irony in her voice, Lady Catherine said that before her was a girl from the Barney family who rarely allowed strangers to come near her, and she wondered if she would ever have a chance to see her again. Countess Catherine loudly attracted the attention of those present, saying that since this was such a rare and special opportunity, everyone should ask Lady Barney to remove her mask. Those present thought it a good idea. Since the town where the Barney family lived was quite difficult to access, it would be a great honor to see Lady Renette's face. The girl could not understand why the Countess was putting her in such a position, as if she was trying to confirm something by seeing her face. With a smile on her face, Catherine said that so many people were asking her to take off her mask, and she couldn't refuse them. This unpleasant person used the crowd, manipulating Renee so that she could not refuse. She did not know what to do, since she would look suspicious if she did not take off her mask. However, Killian told her that from now on, she should not remove the mask from her face. No matter what happened, she promised him. Renee confidently stated that she did not want to take off her mask. Catherine asked to repeat what Lady Barney had just said. The girl repeated once again, especially for the Countess, that she did not want to take off her mask. Clenching her fingers into a fist in anger, Catherine insistently asked the girl to think about everyone here. Renette repeated once again that she was not going to remove the mask, telling the Countess not to insist anymore, since the girl had clearly expressed her intention. Countess Catherine simply turned white at such impudence. Once in her room, she broke all the dishes out of anger, and this girl found herself disgraced in front of the guests at the event. She ordered her maid to send an urgent letter to the Barney family. Catherine was determined to find out if this bitch was really from Barney's family. The maid carefully tried to explain to the Countess that it would look as if they doubted that Lady Renette was really of that family. Out of anger, Catherine hit the maid, causing her to fall to the floor. The Countess was sure that the girl was a servant, whom she had clearly seen, since silver hair was not a common occurrence. She was convinced that some maid had deceived the prince in order to hide her identity and get into the palace. That's exactly how it happened, because that's exactly how Catherine got into the palace. A maid knocked on the Countess's door. She had news. They managed to bring Vanessa Enclair to the palace, but there were difficulties. When the maid went to tell the Countess this to Lady Catherine, another maid told her that His Majesty had invited Lady Barney to see him. The Emperor could not believe that the Barneys had protected and hidden their daughter all this time until she grew into a beautiful young lady. His Majesty also cared very much for his son, but not to this extent. Renette offered her sincere apologies to His Majesty, although in her mind, she was thinking that the Emperor's words were ridiculous. He never cared about Killian. His Highness Prince Killian arrived. The boy apologized to his father for being late. The Emperor was delighted with the appearance of his son, as he only wanted to ask Renette about her family. But Killian immediately said that she was an only child. The prince said that it was for this reason that he suggested to Duke Barney that he send his daughter to the ball, as he thought it would be a good opportunity for them to socialize with other nobles and introduce their family. The Emperor was interested in why the Duke himself did not come, but Killian had an answer to this question too. He said that it was because Lady Renette was the future heir of the Barney family. Among other things, the Duke considers Lady Renette to be the most beautiful and brilliant girl in the world. The Emperor said that sending such a precious daughter to the royal palace was the most respectful gesture on the part of Duke Barney. His Majesty suggested that Renette stay at the palace for a couple more days, adding that this would also give Lady Catherine the opportunity to apologize to the girl. Adolf believed that the Countess meant well when she asked the girl to remove her mask, but he still wanted to give her credit. Renette accepted the offer and thanked His Majesty for his kindness. The Emperor asked his son to show hospitality to Lady Barney during her stay at the palace. At this point, Adolf was about to leave, leaving the couple to enjoy their tea. Renette was glad that she had managed to attract His Majesty's attention, but she asked Killian what he would do if the plan didn't work. After thinking for a moment, the prince replied that otherwise he would have introduced Renette as the one he wanted to marry. Upon hearing this, the girl choked on her tea, and the entire drink ended up on Killian's face. The prince said it was just a joke. He didn't understand why Renette really didn't like the idea that much. The girl was slightly confused and said that she hadn't said that. Killian came very close to her and asked if that was the case. Would she marry him? The crown prince repeated his question once again, whether Renette would become his wife. The girl froze for a moment. Killian immediately stood up and walked over to the window. She started screaming, asking if he was making fun of her. The prince asked Renette for her hand, intending to lead her into the room. He asked her if there was any place she would like to go today. There was such a place. Renette immediately said that she wanted to know where Countess Catherine's room was, since there might be an antidote to the dark magic potion, if they could get it. Then the prince would be safe in the palace. Killian looked at the girl carefully and asked why she wanted to do something he hadn't even told her about. Without waiting for an answer, he immediately apologized for his aggression, saying that he was simply worried about Renée. The girl insisted on her own, as this might be their only chance. Thanks to the antidote, Killian would be safe even if she was not nearby. Taking Renette's hand tenderly, the prince said that he did not want her to put herself in danger. She understood that Killian wanted her to be safe, but this was the only chance she would have to find an antidote. If Renée tried to argue with him, she could be locked in a room for the rest of her time in the palace. So she decided to look for an antidote without telling the prince. Since it was already late, Killian said that he would show the palace to the girl tomorrow. She couldn't tomorrow because she was planning to go to Bern. The crown prince was surprised by such a trip, asking what business she might have in this city. If Renée had told him the truth, Killian would most likely have left her in the castle since it could be dangerous, so she lied to him, saying that there was a great dress shop in this city. In that case, the prince suggested going together. The girl couldn't allow this, so she continued to lie, saying that it was a secret boutique where only girls were allowed to enter, and people wouldn't understand if a prince was there. But Killian still insisted, saying that he would drop her off nearby. Renette decided to divert his attention by asking him to do her a favor instead. The lady was prepared for the trip. The girl thanked the maids, and at the end, they asked her to take care of herself. Having received such attention after living as a cat, the person, she meant cat, never knew where life would take her. Renée had to do what she could while she was in human form. Countess Catherine looked out the window, watching the girl go for a walk. A woman of low birth, who doesn't even know who her father is, pretends to be an aristocrat, and wants to take the place of the main concubine. Countess Catherine believed that this was exactly what Renette was trying to do, that this was her survival strategy. However, this seemed very brave of her. Since she wants to take the place of the countess, she will be crushed. The emperor, addicted to a potion of dark magic, will die without any additional efforts from Catherine, but this will not be enough for the young prince. In fact, it was good for the countess. She was going to prove that Renette was not a real daughter of the Barney family and bring her and the prince to justice, and then completely crush them. After this, the royal palace will be in her power. The girl wondered if she had done too much shopping, but she had to cover up her lie about shopping. Either way, they followed her like ghosts. Renée asked Killian for security, citing that she didn't want any of the countess's people to follow her. She didn't want to get into a dangerous situation while shopping. Hearing such a request, the prince laughed, because Renée asked him to do it anyway. When the guard knights appeared, the unknown masked men immediately disappeared. Finally, the carriage arrived in Candy County. The countess was genuinely surprised to see Lady Renette standing before her. The girl was glad that the countess had not yet set off on her journey, saying that she would like to give her something before leaving. She pointed to boxes and bags that contained popular desserts, luxury clothes, accessories, and just a lot of other stuff, and even more. The countess appreciated the girl's attention, but said with awkwardness in her voice that there were too many of these gifts. Renette asked to accept all this for her sake, as she had heard the good news that her daughter had given birth. The girl turned her attention to the carriage, immediately thinking that Countess Catherine could do something to it. The lady offered to help load the things into the carriage. Renette tripped and fell with a box of sweets. The girl began to apologize profusely to Countess Candy for the fact that the carriage was damaged because of her. She immediately pointed to her carriage, saying that this was a gesture of her apology. Renette was going to take the couple to Bern. Countess Candy's daughter came out to greet her mother. Her attention immediately fell on Lady Renette. She asked who this girl was. The woman happily introduced her daughter, Marie Lorenz, and Lady Renette Barney. The girl happily congratulated Marie on the birth of her child. Lady Lorenz realized that this was the girl she had heard about, and she immediately offered to treat her to tea. Renette politely declined, saying that she had to go to town on business and that they should enjoy time together. The girl asked if she could borrow the Candy family's coachman to go into town. The man was confused by what he heard. The Countess happily agreed, asking the coachman to take Lady Renette to town. Countess Candy would be safe as long as she was here, and Renette was going to take a look around during this time, because Catherine's men might be nearby. That was her goal, but it was difficult to find an important clue in such a short period of time. This coachman looked very uneasy when he first saw Renette. Even now, his hands were shaking more and more. According to Countess Candy, he worked longer than anyone else. Renette immediately noticed that this man looked too suspicious for someone the Countess trusted. The man approached Lady Barney, saying that he was a little hungry and would like to step out for a while. Of course, the lady let him go. She understood perfectly well that she must not lose sight of this man. He ate 3 sandwiches, a corn salad, and 10 macarons for lunch. The man was clearly not hungry, but lied in order to find someone. Renee's attention fell on some strange store called Shimmy and Doves. The coachman was about to send something to the rose garden of the royal palace. It was pigeon mail. Countess Catherine received a letter from the rose garden. The coachman informed her that there was someone else in the carriage, so he recommended tracking down Countess Candy after she returned to the palace. The Countess asked her maid to send a letter to the surveillance squad, which contained an order to burn the carriage. Catherine hadn't promised the coachman that she wouldn't kill him, so everything was fine. The maid understood the order, but decided to clarify what about the tuition fee for her son, which the mistress had promised. The Countess did not understand the point of paying for her son's education when his father was dead. The maid remained silent and went to do what her mistress ordered. Marie said goodbye to her mother, as it was already late and it was time for her to go. And besides, the Countess was receiving an important guest the next day. Renette asked the coachman where he had been and what he was up to, but he became agitated and began shouting that she was unfairly suspecting him. The girl had reasonable suspicions that the coachman was involved in Catherine's plans, but there was no evidence that would help her convince Countess Candy. She had to figure out how to escape from the coachman and run away with Countess Candy. Marie Lorenz suggested to her mother that she and Renette stay with them, and for the girl it turned out to be an excellent plan. The Countess said that this might be uncomfortable for the lady and promised her daughter to come again soon. Renette said that everything was fine, but it was as if no one heard her. The girl approached the coachman and said that her dress had gotten dirty when she was outside, and she needed to change in the carriage. She said that they would close the curtains, and that there was no point in opening them. Renette didn't want to resort to this, but they were already on their way. The Countess began to worry that the coachman was driving so fast. She asked him to tell him to drive more slowly. The girl knew it was dangerous, but there was no other way out. They were driving on the grass. This was their only chance. Looking into Countess Candy's eyes, Renette asked if she trusted her. Holding out her hands to the woman, the girl said that this was their only chance and that they had to jump now. As soon as they jumped off, the carriage exploded,